Welcome back to the St. Croix Customer Appreciation Day here 2021 at St. Croix's headquarters. I'm Jeremy Smith and
James Lindner.
And we're here to talk about, of course, fishing, but we're going to talk more about walleye fishing and some more aggressive techniques for people who like to cast and some pretty darn productive ways of catching walleyes.
No question about it. You know, over the years, walleye fishing has really revolves around a lot of finesse fishing, a lot of live bait fishing. In more recent years, there's been a really pretty dramatic change, probably the last 7 or 8 years, where you've seen a lot more of artificial presentations, a lot more reactive triggering the fish into biting. And, you know, walleyes, when you look at the fish itself, obviously it's got big teeth, and this thing is a carnivore and a big time predator. Obviously, live bait's never going to go away. Live bait is an extraordinarily effective means to catch them. And Jeremy and I, myself, are far from purists. And if you need live bait to catch them, we'll catch them. But if you don't need live bait, and there is a lot of ways to catch them, and we've been really successful using a wide variety of different techniques to catch walleyes with artificials. And that's where we're going to share some different concepts and different thoughts about how to be more effective with these baits.
Yeah, and the first thing that we're going to start off talking about is a hair jig. And this is the hair jig specifically. This is a VMC moontail jig. It's a bucktail jig. If you can see that, this is the original non-live bait dressing ever to go on a jig. So this might have been popular 50, 60 years ago, but in recent years, there's been a renaissance in hair jig fishing. We've just had incredible success fishing with these baits. Now, the idea with the hair jig, you can cast it out, reel it in, that does work, but a lot of times we're actually snapping the bait.
Yeah, you have to really impart a lot of action. The other thing that I'd like to talk a little bit about, many of the jig aspects of fishing for walleyes. So when you look at this hair jig, what is this? This is like a 3
1/4 ounce. Yeah.
No, it's just a quarter, or is this a 3/8?
1/4 ounce.
In the general rule of thumb, when you're fishing jigs and artificials for walleyes, what you want to do is increase your weight. And why I mean that, usually when you're finesse fishing jigs with walleyes, you're fishing very, very slow. You're imparting a lot of the scent and taste in the water, the lively action of the bait to trigger the fish into biting. When you're using artificials like this, whether it be a hair jig, a soft plastic, you want to increase the weight because you want the bait to react. You want it to be able to drop extremely quickly. You pull it back up and let it fall really quickly. You're trying to trigger a reactionary strike. Not that dissimilar, the same sort of concept as a crankbait to a degree. You want the bait to move. And the thing is, I'll just put it this way. If you fish this bait the same way you would fish your classic minnow, jig and minnow, you will not be as successful. No question about it. The really key is to trigger that speed and aggressive behavior to trigger the fish into biting.
Yeah, so how we're fishing it, it's a snap jig. And this is the rod that I've got. The rod that I've got here, this is St. Croix's Legend Tournament. It's the 6/8 medium power, extra fast action. And what makes the rod so important for this technique really is that extra fast action. So the bait, like Jimmy's talking about, it's crashing. The idea is to snap the bait up, give the bait slack so it can crash and dart forward, crash and dart forward. So the fish don't get a lot of time to examine it. The bait falls to the bottom, and a lot of times you either see your line jump when they're hitting it kind of as it crests at the peak, or you just go to jerk again and bam, the fish is on there. But if you're fishing a rod, say you took your rod that you would live bait rig with, it's probably going to be longer and softer. And so if you try to snap with that, all that energy is going into flexing the rod and not moving the lure. So you do want to have a rod that has an extra fast tip. That's a really big thing for this particular technique. And then also it's really a personal preference in terms of line, what you're going to use with something like this. But here, I don't know if you can see this, I've got a high vis line on here. So whether you're a braid person or you're a mono person, that high vis line is really nice for this particular technique because a lot of the fish, like I said, do bite it kind of as that bait's cresting. So it's on the bottom. You snap your rod, you throw it slack, and the bait jumps up, and it kind of hangs, and then it darts forward. When it's hanging like that, a lot of times it's poof, it gets powdered. So you can the strike is actually visual because you've got slack in the line at that point. It's not, you can't feel it, you see it. So then you can react to how the fish is taking it.
The other thing is when Jared was talking about the rod, but to how you're imparting it, and what I would say is what you're as far as your retrieve go, what you're doing is doing more of a pop jigging, and you're doing a high rod stroke. And what I mean by that is 10 to 2, from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and I'm popping it up at a really quick upward sharp angle. And you want the bait to jump up like this and then fall directly back down. So it's really important actually how you're actually retrieving the bait with the rod, no question about it. This is actually sort of interesting. As Jared was saying, there's been a really dramatic resurgence in hair jigs, and that's not only in the weird thing is bass fishing, smallmouth bass fishing, all over the board. Hair jigs have become a really big thing. Actually, there was this guy years ago in Minnesota, Dick Rosinski, who did this retrieve called rip jigging. And he did it, and he actually became really famous, at least in our area, with these chicken hair jigs. And it was up on Lake Winnebagosh, and he would drift really quickly. And what he'd do is throw the bait way out, and just as he's drifting along, and be just ripping the bait like this. And he would catch so many fish, you'd have like a little line counter, or not a lure counter or a fish counter on it, and he'd click, and he said, this is how many I caught on Lake Winnebagosh on Ravens Point. But it's sort of intriguing, so many different aspects of angling. What's new is old, and what old is new, and how different things come into play, and what becomes effective on the water. But this is no question about it. This is a really hot one for artificial for walleyes these days.
It is, and you know, for the jig thing, we're gonna transition now into another technique that's similar. But in terms of like when to use the hair jig and how deep to use it, we tend to, like Jimmy said, we tend to fish heavier bait. So if you were walleye fishing, and most of this is most effective in 15 feet or less,
Yes,
I would say, right in there. So most of the time it's a 1/4 ounce when you're in like that 6 to 10 foot range, and then you'll go up to 3/8 of an ounce once you get in like that 8 to 15 or that 10 to 15 in range, because the drag of the line and the lighter baits don't act the same the deeper in the water that you are. And anytime the walleyes are shallow, this seems to be a really effective technique. And believe it or not, the fish will bite this in weed beds. They'll bite them on sand flats. It can fish through sparse cabbage really well. So it's not just a technique that only works on sand or gravel, but you can even fish this thing through weeds. And there's a lot of walleyes right now in the summer, I can tell you, they're in weed beds.
A lot of guys have really, it's sort of weird because so many different techniques and how things evolve. And what I mean by that, I actually just shot a piece with this exact program on Mille Lacs Lake. And the intriguing thing is how we drove around. We're on Mille Lacs Lake, and we're on these 5 to 8 foot sand flats. And I drive around with side imagery and drive over 100 yards and drop four or five waypoints and coordinates on schools of little pods of fish of anywhere between 5 and 8 fish. I turn around, drop the trolling motor on the end of the pass, and start fishing back through the coordinates, casting right to the fish on side imagery or 360. You can actually see the fish in 4 to 5 foot of water. A lot of people, the intriguing thing is in a lot of different situations, when you get in that shallow water, walleyes are extraordinarily spooky and will not let you get close to them. And have the fish always been there? Maybe they've always been there. This whole thing has been, you see what I mean? But I know one thing, what I'm trying to say is electronics has actually given me extraordinarily, because you drive through there and the guys I'm with, and when we're shooting this piece, they're like, holy mackerel, there's 10 of them right there. There's the 8 of them right there. It's like, and then you come back through there and you throw the bait over there and you go, poop, poop, boom, there's it's just, it was really fun fishing.
It really is amazing. That whole snap jigging technique is something that it's incredibly effective. Again, the biggest takeaway with this is, if you're used to fishing with a jig and live bait, think about pretty much doing the opposite, going heavier and ripping it harder. So if you take this bait and you just kind of hop it along the bottom, you're not going to have nearly the success as you will fishing it really aggressively. Now, when we're talking about aggressive techniques, I'm going to grab another lure here. Sorry for jumping off frame. That I'm guessing a lot of people have probably seen before. This is the jigging wrap, originally an ice fishing lure, and I cannot even tell you how many different types of fish this catches, but how insanely effective it is. I'll let Jimmy talk about this in a second, but I'll share a story with you. Al Lindner, when he really got into this thing big time a number of years ago, and I remember he called me driving back from a lake in central Minnesota. Now, keep in mind, central Minnesota there's good walleye fishing, but this isn't like going to Lake Erie or going to Canada where there's zillions of walleyes. If you get some walleyes, it's a big deal. And he calls me, he said, Jared, I literally was commercial fishing for walleye today. 22 casts, 22 fish, and then I didn't get one on a cast, and then it was like the same thing over and over. He said, it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And the technique is very similar to what we were talking about with snap jigging for walleye.
Yes. The thing is the nice thing about what the jigging wrap does is we're using this though it does work in shallow water, because, you know, we actually were fishing it generally in moderate to deeper water fishing situations. These are sand flats, transitions from hard to soft bottom transitions, big extensions in the lake, and using it anywhere from 15 to 25 foot of water is where it's really super strong. And the thing is, what you come through, and the same thing, we're isolating the fish on the electronics, and we're literally pitching to them. And realistically, full knowing, you'll catch 2 or 3 out of a school, and there's a lot more of them there. But what our goal and our technique with this is, you move and you catch the active fish. It's not like you're going to sit there and keep on eking out more and more out of that one school. What we're going to do is how your fishing technique is a little bit different versus like a lot of live bait fishing, where you're going to camp on a point, drag in a live bait rig or drag in a jig in a minnow, fishing really slowly. This is more of a high-speed approach where you're coming in, you catch the biters, you move on and jump from spot to spot to spot. We go up to Canada every year, and it's the weirdest thing in the world. It's like you need one bait. It's almost scary. But it goes way beyond that, because when you look at this technique, and if I told you about the varied fish species of fishing this same thing, and it's the same thing, that 10 to 2 pop jigging, and what this jigging wrap does, it actually walks the dog. And what I mean by that, you pop it up, it lands one way, and then it pops it up and it lands the other way, and it does like the seesaw action of, and that's what it's a great way to fish the bait. But you don't make really long casts. You're making relatively short casts, 25, 30 foot casts, high rod stroke, and the bait's jumping back and forth like this. But the biggest thing is that we're talking about walleyes right now, other alternate species we've done really good. I mean, this thing in cold water for smallmouth bass in deep water situations, it's just fabulous tool. What alternate species?
It's amazing. I was thinking about a trip that we did up to that Cedar Peralt, and it was like, we caught on the jigging wrap, we caught giant crappies, got walleyes, saugers, muskie.
Jeremy caught a muskie on a jigging wrap. It was
it's just unbelievable. We want to shoot content that features different things or different techniques. That's really the goal. But sometimes you get into situations where you're like, I mean, there is nothing that's even in the same universe as a technique like this. And now this will change. So when we're talking about walleyes, it's one of the places it's really effective when Jimmy's talking about making those short casts is when the bait can make contact with the bottom. Now, in a lot of reef structures, it can be real rocky and bouldery. So unless you want to lose jigging wraps every cast, you're really looking for sand and gravel as the bottom type to do this style of fishing. But if you do see fish that are a foot or so off the bottom in these boulders, you can just drop right on top of them. This is a really dense, heavy, fast-falling bait, and it gives a great sonar return. So you can see the bait really well on your electronics, and you're basically ice fishing for the fish. We did that with the crappies. We've done that with walleyes on a number of occasions. Lake trout, it's an unbelievable lake trout bait. Whitefish, Cisco. We've got just about everything you can think of.
It's a really serious lure that's for a wide variety of different fish species, size, structure. What do you need? 9s, 7s, 5s?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the 7, if you're a walleye angler, the 7 is going to be your go-to size. Sometimes a 9 might be, but 7 is kind of that sweet spot. But for crappies, the 5, and you can even go down to the 3. But 5, 7, 9, if you've got a selection of those. The other story I just want to share quickly with you with that jigging wrap, we're talking about Canada, but obviously we can't go to Canada right now. But a few years ago, we were on the St. Croix River, and a buddy of mine called me up. He said, "You're not going to believe how many of these big buffalo I'm catching, big mouth buffalo, huge buffalo." He's like, these things are like the size of the buoys on the river channel. And we went down there that day, and buffalo, if you're not familiar with them, they kind of look like a carp, but they're a native species. They're plankton eaters. They eat little tiny bugs for the most part. But the buffalo were choking this thing down. And on that day, I think we caught big mouth buffalo, smallmouth buffalo, common carp, walleye, sauger, white bass, crappie, bluegill, flathead catfish, channel catfish. There's like 13 different species we caught. So when you think about lures in your tackle box, how many lures do you have that you can go, you know what? Oh, I bet I could probably catch like 10 or 15 different species on this. So this is definitely one of those lures you want to have on board.
The weird thing is almost all these things, you're going to use the same rod for almost every one of those fishing situations, which is, you think about it, which is sort of odd, because so much in angling is so presentation specific. You need a specific rod for this or that. For this, I mean, almost all of these, for the whitefish, walleyes, lake trout, I would use almost an exact duplicate rod, exact same thing.
Yeah, and when we're talking about rods, I can talk about what Jimmy might have a little different preference than I do, but This rod I was talking about for snap jigging, I use this same rod a lot.
Yeah.
They've got this series in the Icon, the 6'8" medium extra fast. This is the Legend Tournament walleye. I just love this stick. So again, it's medium power, extra fast action. And now for the line, that's really a personal preference. I like fishing with mono with this technique, and that's just me. A lot of people I give a mono stick to in the boat, they go, oh, yeah, how can you stand fishing with mono? It's stretchy, it's, whatever. They like braid. If you're fishing this with braid, make sure you've got a really light drag, because when you go to snap this bait up, if you've got a tight drag, the fish grab it, those hooks can just cut and tear it through. So you want to have some play in the system. So I use 6 pound. That's the line I like using. 6 pound Suffix Advanced mono. This mono is absolutely, it's insane. It's like, you can't break this stuff. I don't know how many big fish I've caught on this line. It is absolutely crazy. But if you're a braid person, a 10 pound braid is another great deal. And I like the high vis for this, because there's a lot of bites that happen on slack. And now the other key part of this system is you have to have a swivel. You have to run a swivel on this. Now, if you want to run a snap swivel, I know some guys that do that right to the bait. I just run a little shank of like 10 pound fluorocarbon below the main line and one of these tiny little ant swivels here, because this bait does twist. It twists when you're jigging it, but also if you cast it, you'll see that it helicopters a lot through the water. So you have terrible line twist if you're not.
If you impart it, yeah, it's a critical part of the system, but it's extraordinarily effective. Okay,
Yeah,
next presentation.
What do you want to talk about next, Jimmy?
I don't know. Look, let's go old school.
All
We're going to talk a little bit, almost more presentation associated to a live bait techniques, sort of, but it's not. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is the drop shot rod, or the drop shotting. Drop shotting was actually initially brought into the country via the bass guys doing for finesse bass fishing presentations that came out of Japan. But realistically, the strong suit of this is actually for a lot of different, any type of moderate to deep water fishing situations. Over the last number of years, we've been using this a lot for walleyes. And the reason why is because of this presentation. What it does, here's the sinker, and then you have a Palomar knot, and I got a small Nico hook. In this particular case, I have 2 different things here. I was going to one that I use for both of these, for both walleyes and smallmouths, but I got an artificial leech on here. But the thing is what it does, because of the way the sinker configuration, it really positions the bait at the right depth level. Right now, I have about 12 inches here. I might raise it up depending on where I'm seeing the fish suspended off the bottom. If they're 2 feet off the bottom, I would extend that length. But what it does is enable you to really accurately place this bait where the fish are. And it's fabulously effective, especially when you're fishing in deeper water situations. Not even deeper water, because I catch a lot of fish along deep weed edges. What I'm doing is more or less sight fishing. Sight fishing with your electronics, where you see the fish, I'm going to drop it vertically right to them, position the bait. In this case, I have a small rubber leech. I could put a little rubber minnow on here. I could, or a little small minnow bait. But the thing is it's just extremely, extremely effective. The thing is, when I'm vertically fishing, you'll notice what I have here on here. I have the same thing. I have the ant, very, very small barrel swivel. And then I actually have a black little bead on here, and I want the black bead on there because I don't want to reel the swivel into the guides, because you'll wreck your tip guide. So that's going to prevent me from reeling it up too far. Right now, I actually have this whole thing on a fluorocarbon leader of about 4 foot. But the cool thing is we've been applying this for a lot of different walleye fishing situations. In the fact, when you're fishing really extreme rocks, because this vertical fishing, I can fish this through a lot of places where you can't put a bait on the bottom. For example, you go to Lake Vermilion. You go up in Lake Vermilion and you throw rigs up on these, but dragging them on a point, you could lose 10 rigs in a row, because the way the rocks are, and they just eat sinkers. But with this vertical presentation, enables you to just touch the bottom, keep it off the bottom, and then accurately place the bait in front of the fish. Now we're talking about walleyes. Well, it's really effective for a lot of different fish.
A lot of different fish. And walleyes are one of those things that something that they will bite soft plastics, but this is a great way to rethink your live bait game. So this is a great time of year when people are out slip bobber fishing, and slip bobber fishing. Jimmy and I just shot a piece on it. Deadly effective. The walleyes were on top of really big, super snaggy boulders where even when we threw the drop shot, we couldn't get close to the fish. They were spooky, so we needed to keep a bait away from us. The drop shot would have been great if they were on sand, but this was too rocky, so we had to use a slip float. But think about when you're slip bobber fishing on like a sharp break or something like that, and the fish are in 12 feet, and the roll goes from 10 to 20, and the fish are in 12. So you want your bait down about 10 feet. Now, if there's wind or there's any boat control, that slip float is set at 10 feet. It goes into 8. It's dragging on the bottom. It might get weeds, and all of a sudden it drifts out into 20. Now that bait is 10 feet off the bottom. With the drop shot, you're always fishing near the fish. The bait is locked in the fish's strike zone. So you can cast a bait, kind of drag that thing back, hold it in place for a little bit, drag it, hold it in place, and it's going right in front of the fish. It's going to be a foot off the bottom where you would want the slip bobber place. So think about this the next time you're fishing really sharp breaks, or if there's areas that have a lot of sandgrass or something like that, where you get a rig down there, it gets caught up in the sandgrass, your minnow gets there, you can keep things up off the bottom. And now Jimmy went with the way a lot of guys tie a drop shot with the polymer knot.
Yes.
If you're not familiar with that style, I fish with these all the time. If you can see this is a VMC spin shot. So what this has, it's got a little wire loop that goes through the hook, and you can tie your main line to this top little loop here, and then it's got a little pincher here that you can put your dropper line. So you tie 2 knots, and then with drop shot fishing, I personally always prefer going a little heavier than I do lighter, so I can just get the bait down. I can constantly feel that I'm in contact. Now, you're not jigging a drop shot like you would a jig, so you're not lifting the sinker up, setting it down, lifting up. You're kind of getting it down there, and then you're managing slack in the line. You're just a little bit of slack in the line, kind of lift it up, pendulum it back, set it back down. But if you're not familiar with how to tie a polymer knot for the drop shot, it can be confusing. The first few times you do it, you tie it, the hook sideways, the hook's upside down. You're like, oh, darn it. This is a great way to just have something. You can tie 2 knots. The fish don't care about that. And the other thing is, then you don't need to have the swivel on the line like Jimmy did there, because what happens with a drop shot, when you send it down, it goes like this, and when you reel it up, it goes like that. So it can be really bad for a line twist. But with this, you can see the hook. See that? The hook spins right around that shank, and you never have to worry about line twist. This is again that finesse Nico hook. It's the same hook Jimmy had on here. That's just an awesome. That Nico hook is like, if they bite it, man, you never, ever feel like you're going to lose a fish.
You know, we initially talked about this rigging really as like almost a more rock fishing. A lot of guys, you hear a lot of the BASS guys, Elite Series, and they're coming up here in the next couple of weeks to fish on St. Lawrence and Lake St. Clair or Lake Champlain, and they're going to be used for deep water smallmouth bass fishing. Realistically, I've had fantastic success with this exact same technique fishing along deep weed beds. You know, in northern Minnesota or central Minnesota where I live, we actually have really clear water lakes, and a lot of times we have weeds down into 18 foot of water, 22 foot of water. And this is fabulously effective for sight fishing along deep weed edges. Again, I'm not generally casting the bait. What I'm doing is vertically managing the bait and watching. It's sort of weird because on today's electronics, I can actually see my barrel swivel, I can see my leech and the jig. And so when I drop it down to the bottom and I can see where my leech is positioned off the bottom, I can see the fish come in and hit the jig. You see, or hit the bait. So what I'm doing is actually fishing directly in the cone below the boat, watching what's going on to really keep this bait at its, the really fine-tuned position in the water column, which is really the effectiveness of this bait, whether you're fishing for smallmouth bass, spotted bass, walleyes, panfish. I mean, Jerry uses it a lot. This is a fabulous technique for bluegills and crappies too. Bluegills in particular. It's unbelievable.
It really is. It's just one of those techniques. And I'm at the point in my life where I end up spending a lot of weekends with my kids, but also in-laws, or taking people fishing up at our cabin north. And this is one of those deals where you can say, hey, you don't fish a lot, but take this, here's this rod, just throw it out the back there, kind of just shake it every once in a while, lift it up, and you don't have to set the hook. There's nothing technical about it. You just look back, and all of a sudden you hear the drag on there, like, oh, I got one. It's just so easy, and it's so effective, and it catches literally everything. So if you want to fish for panfish, get some really small size ones, put a wax worm, a panfish leech on there. You'll be blown away on the size of the bluegills you catch. A lot of crappie situations where the fish you're fishing with a float, run a 4-foot dropper, split the difference. hang it in their face. It's really endless. This is an amazing technique.
It's more of it's more of the technique, and what we're sharing are just different applications. We're targeting walleyes, but you cannot talk about the drop shot rig without talking about these other species of fish that this is highly effective. The interesting thing, I'm using this icon. I use this for a lot of those different species. I use this for smallmouth bass. It's a great rod for it. For walleyes, exact same thing.
That's the slipping rig rod. Is that what that one is?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's just a fabulous rod that I use it for a lot of different fish species.
Yeah, so a good drop shot rod, it's the same rod that you would use for a lot of live bait rigging presentations. I like something in that 7 foot. If you can go up to 8.6 if you want, but 7.6 somewhere in there with a medium light power. Again, kind of that extra fast action is nice. You're fishing with light wire hooks most of the time. So for a main line, a lot of times we're running 10-pound braid, something like that, and then the line between the hook and the dropper, that's just going to depend on the type of cover that you're fishing and the type of fish that you're fishing for. But a lot of times a 10 braid, 10-pound fluorocarbon is just a really great setup. So we're getting a little close on time there. So thank you guys so much for listening to us babble.
No, it's always a pleasure. Now we get to go out to the big show. We're going out to the tent, and we got a lot of activities where they got brats going out there. They got a lot of good deals going on. We're at the St. Croix Customer Appreciation. It's always a pleasure here. It's been sort of old home week. We've been coming here for the last number of years, and we got all the same bodies, Doug West, and all these different people that I've met over the years coming back. It's really
great to be out of the pandemic and actually get to see people in person.
Yeah, it really has. It's been fun.
Thank you.